Yes, afternoon and welcome. I'm Gordon Gladstone, the Executive Director of Congregation Shereth Israel, and I'm really delighted to welcome you all to this program that we're doing with the New Israel Fund today. I'm just going to look at my notes and say it out loud because that's always awkward. We want to welcome our guests, member of Knesset, and I'm going to get this wrong, right, in terms of pronouncing your name? Okay. Ghadia? Ghadia, Raja, Ken? Okay. Ghadia Rinawie-Zoabi, who is with the Meretz party, which is a left-of-center party in the Israeli Knesset, Israeli parliament. And she comes from a work background in strategic consulting, organizational development, and community activism with a special attention to women's rights. And she was the founding executive director of the Injaz Center for Professional Arab Local Governance. Currently a member of the Knesset, which we mentioned before, serves on the Finance, Economic Affairs, and Arab Society committees, and also deputy speaker of the Knesset, which is a first for an Arab woman. Kol hakavod. Amnon Berri Suliziano, you are the co-CEO of the Abraham Fund since 2004. Prior to that, you were spokesman of the Ministry of the Klita Absorption Ministry from 1996 under Yair Tzaban, and shaping. I'm a little hot here. Microphone-wise, yeah? Okay. Shaping Israel's immigrant absorption during the waves of immigration from the former Soviet Union and Ethiopia. And you have a master's in public policy and administration and a bachelor's degree in African studies from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And finally, Dr. Thabet Abu Ras, co-CEO of the Abraham Initiative since 2014, a central role in creating future visions documents which provided a roadmap for the demands of Israel's Arab community. Before joining Abraham Initiatives, you directed Adala's Negev office, co-director of New Horizon, the Arab Jewish Center for Dialogue and Shared Society, and co-founded the Association of Environmental Justice in Israel. A political geographer who is taught at Ben Gurion University and Sapir College, an expert in Arab politics in Israel, and a prominent voice in promoting Arab-Jewish political partnership, with a PhD in regional development and Middle Eastern studies from the University of Arizona. And I forget what their mascot is, that would be Go. Whatever they are. And I want to take a moment now and welcome Shimrit, who will tell us a little bit about the New Israel Fund.
Thank you so much, Gordon. Thank you also for Shereth Israel for having us today and for your ongoing partnership. We're very grateful for it. And thanks also for everyone who joined us here in the room and also online. And it's exciting to see our activists from Israel are finally traveling again and visiting us. Welcome to San Francisco. Mm-hmm. My name is Shimrit Brown-Kamin, and I'm the Associate Director of the New Israel Fund in the Bay Area. I think that you're going to hear today about the strengths of a Jewish-Arab partnership in Israel, even in difficult time. And it is a difficult moment, as we heard in the news this morning, that Israeli coalition is very fragile and lost its majority, and there is a big question mark on the sustainability of the government. But I think that what you're going to hear today, that despite the difficult moments, the infrastructure of civil society in Israel is stronger than ever, and I think that they're ready to deal with any challenge that might come up. Before we dive into the conversation, I just want to say a few words about the New Israel Fund for those of you who are not familiar with us. The New Israel Fund is the leading organization for democracy and equality for all Israelis. Since its establishment in 1979, we work to fund and found and counseled almost every progressive organization in Israel and granted over $300 million for over 900 Israeli organizations. And today, New Israel Fund is the leading advocate for democracy, building coalitions and empowering activists for social change in Israel. We focus our work in the areas of human and civil rights, social and economic justice, religious freedom, and shared society that we will focus on conversation today. And just to say about the Abraham initiatives, they're not and other grantees of the New Israel Fund that work in shared society are not only on the front line, they are the front line, working to maintain peace and calm and build hope. And especially in these difficult times, I think that you're going to draw a lot of hope from the work of Ghadia, Amnon, and Thabet. So thank you so much, and I'm passing it to Gordon.
Thank you. So I'm going to just start with a question that would be on anybody's mind who, like me, gets push notifications from Aretz every morning. So, with the government now is down to 60 members of Knesset. There's a lot of speculation about what happens next, and I'm very curious, but what do you think happens next?
Okay, so first of all, thank you for arranging this lovely event, and of course for Abraham Initiatives and NIF, and for hosting us in this really beautiful, remarkable synagogue. I think that, you know, we're in the Middle East, and there's no dull moment in the Middle East. Always, you know, surprise after surprise. What happened, you know, is that yesterday, Edith Silman, she is the head or the chair of the coalition. She's a member of the Knesset from the Bennett's, Prime Minister Bennett's political party, Yemina. She decided that she wants to exit the coalition and to join the opposition. And in that sense, now the coalition is on a very, very rocky and sensitive situation because we don't have majority. You know, we're talking about 60 members of the Knesset out of 120. From the beginning, this coalition was you know, on a very, very tight situation because it was a small majority of 61. And this coalition, in its nature, is a very, very complicated coalition, where for the first time ever in the history of Israel, we have a coalition that is of 8 different political parties going through from the really, really right wing, including settlers, to the middle or the central politics, to really left wing political parties, anti-occupation, and for the first time ever, that this coalition includes also an Arab political party coming from the mainstream of Arab politics. So in that sense, what could be happening now in the coming months? Well, first of all, now until the mid-May, we, as you know, as Knesset member, the Knesset is in recession, so we will proceed our work starting from the middle of May, and until then, there will be a lot of attempts, I speculate, from the opposition and from the former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to seek whether there will be an additional member of the Knesset from the coalition getting out and doing what Edith Silman did. And then if that happens, then he has the majority to assemble a government. In one sense, there are a lot of scenarios. One scenario that we will be all going again to elections in October, November. It means that in the last 40 years, Israel has been going to a really chaotic situation of rounds and rounds and rounds of elections. It means that we cannot get a state budget. You know, I sit, as you mentioned, I sit at the committee of of Treasury, and in November, for the first time in 3 years, we had succeeded to issue a state budget, because until now, all governmental ministries did not have any budget.
Right. It was all frozen from the last year there was a budget.
Exactly.
Right.
So it is chaotic. If we go to another round of elections, it would be a real chaotic. I'm afraid that a lot of people will not have the motivation to get out and vote. Mm-hmm. And for the Arab community, this is a true disaster because we see now that more and more Arab politics and Arab political parties can and are playing a major role in Israeli politics. And if the Arab political parties are weakened because less voters are voting, then I think that we will have a very, very difficult situation. So we'll see what will happen. You know, it's, as I said, I believe at the end of the day, I believe that in any case, there are benefits of this coalition. One major benefit of this coalition is that it showed all citizens of Israel that you know, the Arab politicians can be part of the political game, and this is a major message.
So I'm dying to ask you all sorts of inside, as we say in English, inside baseball, right? You know, like, well, what do you think? You know, Hadash will do, and right. But I want to bring these other two gentlemen into the conversation, and I'm curious. So one of the things that's been really notable about this period, right, is that, as you said, this coalition, that it, you know, it's the right and left of both Jewish and Arab politics, which is right. You know, to see Mansour Abbas and Avigdor Lieberman sit together in a government, you know, unbelievable, right? You know, they're, you know, they probably agree on things that they don't want to admit they agree on, but it's bizarre. But I think one of the things that was really notable after the events of last week was the change in how people talked about what had happened. So for those of you who don't follow the news the way I do, there were a number of attacks in the last week of Arabs attacking Jews in a couple of different places with very tragic results. And it was interesting to watch politicians from both sides talk about it. And there was an article I had read by Yair Rosenberg, who talked about how it wasn't, they stopped saying Arab terror and they started saying terror. And I'm sort of curious to, your reactions to that, like, you know, how do you feel like there's been a change in tone? And, you know, in terms of how people talk about these things, how people react to these things, that's different than it would have been, say, you know, under the last government, certainly, but, you know, in years past. And to what degree do you feel like that's an outgrowth of, you know, the much more tragic events of last year? So either of you can.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. First of all, it's great to be here, and I wanted to relate to what my colleague just said. Maybe we'll say a few things that what we are witnessing right now, the new development in Israel, it's a major crisis for the Israeli democracy. 5 rounds of election in 4 years, it's too many times for a very fragile democracy. But there is something good for the Arabs in this moment, that there is 2 political blocs in Israel. I believe center-right and right-wing bloc, 2 different blocs, that Arabs can really dictate who's going to be the next, who's going to be the prime minister of Israel, either Bennett to continue Bennett or maybe Netanyahu. It's very strange to see that Netanyahu has just renewed his Facebook account in Arabic now. He already think about Arab votes, counting in Arab votes is very interesting. It's a great opportunity for the Arabs really that to be more engaged, more involved, and really to use this position, very delicate and important position. But another important point that it seems to us that over time, Arab citizens became so important for the Israeli politics. The political partnership and legitimization of the Arab votes is good for Jews, it's good for the Arabs, and we as an organization, the Abraham Initiatives, have been working to push for participation and representation of the Arabs in politics. We believe the engagement and the integration of Arab in politics can bring about the integration of Arab citizens in all other realms within Israeli society. Yes, as you heard, the tragic tragic events that took place just a couple of weeks ago, it caught us in a very bad moment. Terrorist attacks that this time Arab citizens involved in it. This is something new for us. We are in the same side. We are also victims of ISIS. We have to mention that. We condemn such attacks, those attacks unacceptable for the Arab community. It's bad for the image of the Arabs and it's bad for the Jews. By the way, two policemen actually, Arab policemen were killed in these events. So yes, this wave, I believe, hopefully it's not a wave of terrorist attacks, brought us to think about what's going on inside our community. We have to think about deeper and to check things. After all, the direction of the Arab community is for more integration within the Israeli society. And there is a lot of achievements that is taking place in the last 4 or 5 years. We have to keep that, we have to strengthen that. So this tragic events really caught us, terrorist attacks caught us in a crossroad, and we have to stop. It's a wake-up call for us to think about what's going on in terms of internally within the Arab community, and we have a lot of challenges related. Mainly, the major challenge within the Arab community is the issue in the crime and violence and the illegal weapons and so forth, but also to think more about how to proceed, how to build shared society, share the future, and how to keep the achievement that made in the last few years.
Yeah, I'd like to say that the big drama of Jewish-Arab relations recently is happening in hospitals and universities and NGOs and private businesses and in government offices and in the police force and in the fire brigades. Israeli Arabs are getting integrated into every realm of society. And if 10 years ago or 12 years ago, this type of terror attacks happened, then people potentially could say, we are not interested in this interaction with Arabs. Today the situation is completely different. It's not an option. There are tens of thousands of contact points between Jews and Arabs everywhere that you can imagine, in every type of organization, in the public sphere, in recreation centers, in everywhere. And the dilemma is how to manage those relations in times of tension. And our assumption, at least at the Abraham Initiatives, is that every once in a while, we are going to experience tension which is based on geopolitical events, on confrontations between Israel and its neighbors, Israel and Gaza, events in Jerusalem. Everything is interlinked and everything is connected. and everything impacts the sentiments within Israel between Jews and Arabs. And this is why one of the main roles that we took upon ourselves in this crisis and also last year, last May, was to offer counseling and knowledge and advice to those thousands of organizations, including mixed cities and regions, including universities, and what to do. How to make sure that both Jews and Arabs who work in those places and the consumer of the services of those places keep living together, keep coming to work, keep providing their families, etc. And this is one major thing. I think that this time we were very fast to react. There is a whole community, and I think that NIF was mentioned here as an organization that funds and enables the operation of many organizations, and we work with NIF very closely. And I think that together, we've managed to build the whole community, which is pretty strong. And we are voicing we have our arguments as well. And I think that what we are offering to Israelis is a sane alternative. There is always the rhetoric, which is based on hatred, that has a plan, that I can't really follow. No one knows exactly what is the plan, So you incite one group against the other, but what is your strategy? What do they hope for? What exactly they hope that will happen? No one really knows. I think that we offer an alternative that is not a rosy one, but it's manageable. It offers an Israel in which both communities can live peacefully and integrated on equal terms. No one is going anywhere. And I think that this is the big struggle that we are engaged with.
So there are like a dozen different directions I'd like to go in, but we don't have time to go in all of them. But I am sort of curious as to all of you think about, as you were talking earlier, I was thinking, so the Arab voter, or the vote, right, that block sort of becomes like the Haredim, right, this group that gets chased after by both sides to secure a coalition. I guess sort of, thinking back to what's come out of this last budget and sort of going forward, sort of, okay, the Haredim come and they say, oh, we'd like money for the yeshivas and we would like, a continued exemption from the draft and what have you, right? So if the Arab voter had to come up with like their top three, what do you see on that agenda? And I fully realize that there's probably not broad agreement because I don't imagine that the Arab Israeli community has any more consensus than the Jewish Israeli community, but I am curious.
Well, what I would like to say in that notion is that, first of all, if you look at the changes that happened in the last decade within the Arab society in Israel, it also affected the changes that we are now seeing in how Arab political parties are behaving. And that's a fact. There were a lot.
Do you think that's because of a higher level education?
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. I think that there were a lot of elements to this change within the Arab society. One is demography, because the Arab society is a very young society. Two is globalization. Of course, being understanding that you are part of a much larger, mainly economical sphere. Three is a middle class that is getting much more wider and stronger, more educated, as you said, more professional, that wants what any other middle class wants, you know, higher quality of services in education, in housing, in employment, and etc. Women, Arab women, as a really driving force in all arenas of life, including also politics, and the social media as being a driving force and changing the political discourse. Where, you know, usually 10 years ago we did, you know, a lot of discussions politically in newspapers and in households, and now we do that either on Twitter or on TikTok. So it is
WhatsApp, everybody's moved off of. Is that it?
Yeah. It differs what level. So that happened, and in that sense, this also affected hugely how the Arab politics is behaving, and you can see two results of this translating into politics. One is that in 2018, a big taboo was broken when the Arab Joint List, which was, you know, all the Arab political party joined together under one roof, had issued a recommendation of Gantz to have a government, and they said that we will support Gantz if you would be a prime minister. That was, you know, before that nobody thought that will be happening, and it happened. Another major taboo that was broken also when RAM, which is an Arab political party from the Joint List, split and entered proactively the coalition for the first time ever, sitting with you know, right-wing political parties and becoming part of the government, becoming part of decision-making on the highest level. And in that sense, there were a lot of changes that happened. You know, one major translation of it was, of course, the economic plan that issued billions of dollars for developing the Arab local municipalities, towns, housing, policing,
right.
etc.
And it was in the Negev and in Wadi Ara and Umm al-Fahim.
Of course. And in that sense, it also challenged, you know, the entrance of an Arab political party challenged Jewish politicians in a way that we're part of the agenda, and we're part of the you know, of the game. And you have to consider our agenda as part of the total total issue. When we talk about shared society, my own vision is that when I look at what is happening in Israeli politics, I see that until now, Israeli politics is a very, very you know, specific politics of identities, because you have political parties for the Arabs, for the Russian speakers, for the Haredim. You have, within the Haredim, you have the Mizrahi,
the
Ashkenazi.
Yeah, right.
So you have a lot of political parties, and that's okay. But I believe that if we want to go forward and build a true democracy in Israel, we need to start building a second floor of politics that would ask the question of what does it mean to be an Israeli, that goes beyond you being a Jew or goes beyond you being an Arab. And this is something that I think that civil society can play a major role in this issue.
You asked what are the what can Arab parties demand or ask in return to support And the truth of the matter is that we at the Abraham Initiatives have, we are measuring or asking or polling the Arab community, the Arab society every once in a while, and especially before elections, and in a pretty sturdy, systematic way, you can say that, and it's pretty consistent, that the Arab community is focused on three top priorities. One is, as Thabet mentioned, the need to combat crime and violence, which is the greatest barrier for prosperity and development of the Arab towns, and it is a real epidemic within Arab society. This is one thing. Another issue is the issue of housing and land, especially in the Negev, especially the need to solve the issue of the unrecognized villages in the Negev. And last but definitely not least, to end the occupation. The Arab community in Israel and some people are hoping that Israeli Arab citizens forgot about the occupation or don't care or care only about narrowing socioeconomic gaps. This is not the case. The Arab society, Israeli Palestinian citizens are carrying two main flags. One flag, sure, the need for equal services and for socioeconomic development, but at the same time, the need to make sure that there is a Palestinian state alongside Israel, and that the national aspirations of the Palestinians are fulfilled by the creation of this Palestinian state, and the end of the occupation and the serious violation of human rights in the occupied territories. So if you ask what Arab parties can demand, our polls show it in a very clear way.
Right.
Yeah, well, I would like to add to what Amnon and Ghadia just said, that there is one more demand from the Arab community, which is combating racism within Israel. We are focusing in the achievement, which is a great achievement, of political partnership between Jews and Arabs, and the legitimization of the Arab votes and the Arab community in terms of politics. Yet we are ignoring the legitimization of racism in Israel, legitimization of the extreme right wing, and I'm talking here about Kahanism, about Ben Gvir and Smotrich. What the Israeli society and the Israeli politics, they didn't tolerate 40 years ago, what Menachem Begin refused to accept, and Yair Shamir, two prime ministers from the Likud, refused to accept Kahanism. Now there is a legitimization for racism by the right wing, mainly the right wing. And this is worrying, this is alarming for the Arab citizen now, and should be alarming for everybody. What is taking place in Israel is that the Arabs are knocking in the doors of the Israeli society. They would like to integrate, and they are integrating. Listen, look to the hospitals. 22% of the total doctors are Arabs. Go to pharmacies in Israel. 50% of the pharmacists are Arabs. 39% of the nurses are Arabs, and Arabs are integrating in every realm of society. Unlike the Haredic Jews. Haredic Jews, they are looking for their rights, which is fine, but I'm not sure if they would like to integrate. Israel is becoming more mixed country. We are talking about mixed cities and mixed regions now, and it's a small country, and Arabs and the Middle East, the middle class Arabs are expanding and becoming stronger and looking for better life, looking for equality of lives, and they can find this equality of life in the Jewish cities. So are moving there, and this is, all of a sudden we ask, how come you are coming to live here? And it's a challenge for some Jewish communities. So what we need right now to demand, besides the things that listed by Amnon, it's combating racism, maybe outlaw new legislation. We have to look for new legislation and to treat the Arabs as full citizens. This is really worrying us a lot.
And I think one of the things that I was struck by when I first lived in Israel, and this is now close to 30 years ago was the sort of level of casual racism that existed. And it, it wasn't as loud as it is today, but it definitely existed. I remember listening to a Haifa city council member from Shas talking about why he was against mixed kindergartens. He's like, no Jewish mother wants their child in a kindergarten with Arab kids, and no Arab mother wants it either. And I remember sort of listening to the radio, and I was, first of all, that I could understand it in Hebrew. That was lovely for me. But I was just struck by, I was just like, can you say that out loud? Like, is that, like, in America, you say that very quietly behind a door somewhere. Less so today, unfortunately. But at the same time, I think about the generation that you're describing that is college educated, striving for the middle class, and so I had a friend, Samir, who passed a number of years ago, but his kids, Samir, I don't think ever even went through high school, but all of his kids went to college, every single one of them, and became successful in, different, paths, working for Israeli corporations, managing restaurants, and what have you. Their Hebrew is perfect. They walk down the street, they're indistinguishable from Israelis, one of the great tragedies of last year was, they made their home in Ramla, which had been a mixed city, although not a paragon of coexistence, and erupted into such violence. And I'm curious, to what degree has the rapprochement with the Gulf states played into any of this? Because on one hand, the right-wing governments, right, have, touted this, like, oh, look, we made friends with, Dubai. But does that mean anything on the ground in Haifa or Ramallah, for that matter?
Well, first of all, I would like to comment on, your example of this Shas member of the municipality in Haifa. And remind us all that a few years ago, like 3 or 4 years ago, Bezalel Smotrich, who is a member of the Knesset, said that he wants his wife, because his wife was giving birth, and he wanted her not to be in the same room in the hospital with an Arab woman giving birth. So it's racism, like
right, in a staggering way.
Yeah, and what amazes me each time is that people are not ashamed of being racist. If that would have happened in any other country, this member of the parliament would be, but nothing happened. Nothing happened, and this is the main issue of racism in Israel. People stopped being ashamed of their racism. It's like now it's a popular sport. Who gets to be more racist? And this is the fight that we need all to fight, Jews and Arabs. Regarding the Abraham Accord, I think that the Abraham Accord had, opened a new chapter in the geopolitical map in the Middle East. If you look at what is happening now in Israel relation, not only to the Gulf countries, but also with Turkey, with Lebanon, with Iraq, and with other countries, but also it also impacted how the Arab society in Israel perceive, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict in a way that, if until now the issue of Palestinian-Israeli conflict is the most important thing, and it is geopolitically speaking, we say, but if you look at how there was a major gap in a way that some Arab politicians say that we want accept the Abraham Accord, and in that sense, I think that they had made a major mistake. And if you look at the behavior of the people, you know, in our society, in the Arab society, tens of thousands of people went as tourists to Dubai and to Abu Dhabi and to all these places, and went shopping and went, you know, for entertainment, etc., etc. So it had made a major gap between some Arab politicians, what they think about the Abraham Accords, and how people reacted in you know, on a daily life. Yeah.
I would like to add to this issue that let us remember that Israel and United Arab Emirates never in a war. So we cannot really talk about peace between the Gulf states and Israel. I believe it's agreement. It's very important, geopolitical agreements, so important agreement that all of these, the partners for this agreement have one enemy, which is Iran. Mm-hmm. This is the analysis of my analysis, geopolitical analysis. Yet we have to distinguish, to look, this is an agreement between regimes, between Israeli government and Arab governments in the Gulf states. Hopefully, I would like to say it's peace between people. Yes, there are tens of thousands of Arabs from Israel, also Jews, really traveled to Dubai and Abu Dhabi and to Manama of Bahrain as tourists. They are so thirsty to connect with Arab culture, with economic opportunities, but we didn't see the same movement comes from the Gulf state to Israel. And this is very important. Still, Israel is not legitimate among the masses in the Arab world because of the Palestinian issue. I believe that peace should, any Israeli Arab relations should pass through Jerusalem and Ramallah and Gaza, mean to solve the Palestinian issue. I believe as we can talk about peace between nations, not only regimes. I have a lot of criticism of the Arab regimes in the Gulf states. It's not the time to talk about that, but these among the most fanatic regimes, undemocratic regimes, yet because of the Israeli interest, we are happy to have this kind of relations. Nobody can be against peace. We all should promote and support peace. What we are witnessing in this kind of relations is more common interest, security, regional security interest more than, and economic interest more than anything else.
So, I mean, you make it remind me of the peace agreements we had with Egypt and then with Jordan. Yes. And, you know, with the Egyptians, they always called it a cold peace, yes. Right? You know, Egyptians never came to Tel Aviv. Israelis went to Sharm el-Sheikh.
Still, it's better than a war, okay?
Better than a war, absolutely.
Cold,
yeah. No, for sure. And I remember being in Amman in '96, and then there was sort of like a little, like, it almost felt like something was happening, and then it ended. So you had something you wanted to add to the conversation?
No, no.
Okay. I mean, but it's interesting to hear you talk about that interplay and to think about how that affects, you know, the identity of Arab citizens of Israel, and you know, and also to think about, you know, this question of, you know, an Israeli identity that's somewhat divorced from either ethnic or religious, you know, roots. And, you know, I'm curious to whether, you know, I imagine you believe it's possible, but I'm curious, like, okay, so how soon? Right? Because there is this, you know, if you think about so much of Israeli history is founded in this idea of an ethno-nationalist state, right? It's a state for the Jews, and at the same time, the Declaration of Statehood says it is a state of all of its citizens. And I feel like that's always been a real, like, tough pull. And, you know, I'm curious, sort of like, you know, do you feel hopeful about getting to a place where people say, I'm Israeli without any sort of, like, you know, commas more parentheses, you know, like I'm a, you know, this Israeli, that Israeli, you know.
Yes. Okay, well, I'm happy to answer this question, actually.
I'm looking for profits, so.
Yeah, no,
you know.
all are profits, that's fine. I believe that the duality of our citizenship is the most important thing for us. We are Palestinians, and we are Israelis in the same time, okay? We don't have any problem with the fact that Israel is an expression of self-determination of Jewish people. Yes, this is part of UN Partition Plan 1947. The question, what about us? Where are we in this equation? What about the Palestinian people? We are not rushing to talk about Israel as a Jewish state now, as long as there is no Palestinian state, that national expression of the Palestinian people. If you ask me what's going on inside Israel, the overwhelming majority of the Arabs see them as Palestinians and as Israelis, and we have to normalize this duality of identity. Unfortunately, the state of Israel is escaping from us. It's becoming more Jewish state in the expense of its democratic values. And this is really another worry for us.
And I guess it comes back to a question of governance, right? So, you know, now we have a governing coalition that contains a fair number of Democrats, small d, you know, who are saying, no, a state for all of its citizens, and how do you see that playing out, you know, for the lifetime of this government, however long that is, whether it's a month, a year, or 2, you know, another 3 years.
Well, I think that you know, during the lifetime of this coalition, a year and so, I think that there has been 2 levels. One level that was much more important in a way for this coalition, and it is the issue of socioeconomical legislations and processes, etc., etc. In a way that if you look at the vast majority of the legislations in this year, we focused mainly on you know, whether it's issues of health or education or any other, you know, aspects of living, and all, you know, more of a geopolitical and political and ideological issues were put aside, and in that sense, we focused less on things that could have been much more sensitive, issues that you know, shared society of democracy, etc., were left aside. Even so, and I will give you one example that we didn't, as Meretz, we didn't succeed in. One of the, you know, when we entered the coalition, one of the major components of our agreement with the coalition as Meretz was for the coalition or for the government to budget a major budget to be allocated to education for peace and for coexistence. And after a year and almost a half, we couldn't, until now, we couldn't get this chapter of agreement to be issued. And if you think about it, that would be something that, you know, what can be an obstacle for this coalition to issue a very, very important agenda of peace, educating for peace and for coexistence. But because of the fact that it is a very, very political issue for the leftists in the coalition, we failed. And I think that, you know, retrospective. Sorry, thank you. In retrospective, I think that that was one thing that we should have been more stubborn enough to say, no, this is something that is important for us.
So we have a few minutes left. If we, is that a question, Peter? Oh, I have to check my email? I have to pull my phone out of my pocket and camera? Really? That's going to be awkward. It's on YouTube? From YouTube. The kids today. I'm checking my email from Peter Bonus. Okay, so I'm going to go with David's question. So there was a question as to whether or not, and I'm curious in your quick answer, if there was any kind of connection between the attacks recently and the relationships between Israel and principally the other Sunni states in the Gulf, if that was an attempt to disrupt those, or merely an attempt to disrupt Ramadan celebrations, or if you had to guess at the motivation of these attackers, and not that any of you can climb into their heads, but.
So I think that Thabet said, some of those, at least two of those attacks were carried out by ISIS, and we know that ISIS acts throughout the Middle East and Europe and elsewhere, and it's not unique to Israel. But I want to say something a little bit more general about those who are trying to ruin the prospect for shared living and for a shared society in Israel. We have seen them in what they tried to do before, and we will continue to see them.
Right. And they come from both communities.
And they're coming from both communities, both. There are those who act on behalf, so to speak, on both communities in order to destroy our shared and common interest and our shared society. And the answer, I think, is exactly what we are doing on the ground in innovative projects like, I'll give you an example, like shared learning in Israel, in which we convince mixed cities to implement a program that brings Jewish and Arab teenagers in junior high schools to study one subject together on a weekly basis. Mm-hmm. This is one example. Another example is a project which we have introduced to the Ministry of Education now that educates against racism. Thabet spoke about the need to combat racism in high schools, in both Jewish and Arab high schools, because right now in Israel there isn't any governmental program that deals with racism in high school, and Israeli high schools are now the incubators, I would say, for racist sentiment. So this is something that we're doing with the hope that once we prove that our ideas are beneficial and successful, the government of Israel and the Ministry of Education will implement them. Another example deals with combating crime and violence. So, until recently, the Israeli government did not pay any attention to this issue. They were not aware of the fact that the Arab community does not trust the Israeli police because of the fact that the police sees this community as part of the enemy. And this animosity left the ground, for the criminals to do whatever they want to do. And only recently, the government allocated $10 billion, actually over 32 billion shekels over 5 years to tackle the root causes for violence and crime in the Arab community. And I'm talking about welfare and education, recreation, infrastructures, and better policing to the Arab community. So all of those issues are the answer to the fanatics on both sides who are trying to destroy our shared future.
I just would like to add to what Amnon just said, that we are in the Abraham Initiatives with many other shared society NGOs, with the human rights organizations also in Israel. I believe we have the power to continue to change Israeli society toward a real shared society. I know there are many challenges to achieve such, it sounds ambitious, but the fact that people are meeting in so many places, not only in the hospitals, you mentioned hospitals, Arabs and Jews are now meeting in the public spaces in every realm of life. And the fact that this government, with a lot of criticism too, but we had a new relationship with this government. We never had it in the last 12 years under Netanyahu's regime, that really cooperating some of the ministers and the deputy ministers and the professions in the offices are not only friends, they are consulting us, we are reaching to them, and we are working together to try to make our life for Jews and Arabs really better life. I am an optimistic person, and I feel that despite racism, I emphasize the issue of racism. Yes, we are in the right direction.
Thank you. We're just about at the top of the hour. I want to thank the three of you for coming all the way to the edge of America and joining us here. And thank you so much, both for your insights and I think, a hopeful message for an Israel that is more reflective of its founding documents. And inshallah, it comes soon. And Shimri, did you want to give us a closing remark? Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Thabet.
Oh, closer to the microphone.
Thank you so much for all of you. It was really inspiring to listen to you today, and it's really, I feel like, especially in these days, to know that the meaningful work you're doing on the ground is making so much change that I feel like no matter what the political situation will be and what the future of this government, we know that your work will continue to be impactful, and it won't go away. So thank you so much for that, and thank you, Gordon, and thanks for everyone who joined us and listened today. Just I wanted to let you know about some upcoming events we're having if you want to keep learning about the work of civil society in Israel. This Sunday there is going to be a conversation about social psychology for social change with an AF grantee called Accord. It's in the Palo Alto JCC. On April 28th, we're going to have a virtual conversation hosted by Temple Emmanuel with our NAF CEO, Daniel Sokach, and Martin Indyk about the new books. And also coming up on May 3rd, it's the Memorial Day in Israel, and we'll be broadcasting the joint memorial ceremony live from Israel. And last but not least, our gala is coming up on September 18, and more details to come soon. So thank you so much again. And happy Passover, Ramadan Kareem, and happy Easter.
And it's almost Easter. Yeah. And for our community, I want to, thank you to the New Israel Fund for being such a great partner and bringing us such fabulous guests. We'll be hosting a conversation on Monday talking about Ukraine, the crisis there, and how some Israeli NGOs are getting involved in both supporting people on the ground and rescuing Jews who were still in the Ukraine. So that's Monday at noon. You can find more details on our website, and I hope you'll join us for that. And I want to thank everybody again for joining us both in person and online, and wish you a somewhat early Shabbat Shalom and a lovely weekend.
Thank you
Very much.